Hi there, Jason from English Raven here, and in this tutorial for teaching materials design, now I'm actually going to do something a little bit different now. I'm not going to show you so much how to build or how to insert or how to format something. I'm now going to sort of quickly discuss some aspects of methodology for content. Now, you're looking at one of the templates here that we've made together. This is something we made in the previous tutorial, the cappuccino chat, and I showed you how to build this kind of worksheet for either presentation on the screen or as a printout that you can use with your learners. So we went through how to actually build that, and I have gone over some of the I've mentioned some of the general priorities here in terms of the 1-3 design principle, which is having some sort of input or content to work with, and then 1, 2, 3 applications or extensions of that. Now, what I'm actually going to discuss now is what you can do with that. Once you have a template set up, once you have a general design principle that can work, it doesn't need to be the only design principle that you use, but if you're looking for something that you can use consistently, you might want to think about how you can manipulate your actual teaching methodology through your material. Now, to explain what I mean, if I show you this is the design principle in terms of the teaching methodology, that we have our content input here, and then we have 3 applications that extend or apply that content or input. And once we've formatted the material, it looks more like this. But in terms of the general methodology, I'll skim through some of the things that you might like to think about in terms of what a template like this does for our ability to adjust and experiment with our methodology within a consistent framework. Okay, so that's what the general approach looks like schematically. Now, the template that we made there for the cappuccino chat basically applies this theory that we have a listening or speaking dialogue here on the left. We have a comprehension exercise. We go through some vocabulary. In this case, it was like spoken language. And then we extend it and encourage the learners to be productive in some way. That's the basic template for what's sort of going on with methodology in that material. But we could actually just change that a little bit, even by doing something with the input, and that is by only giving them part of the content, which would involve them listening a little bit more rather than just seeing the text. We could put gap fills in, or we could scramble that information. So we could work with this text here, this input, and present it in a slightly different way. And that would immediately change our methodology in some way. They're not just sort of spoon-fed the dialogue in terms of it being a printed script, that they would need to actually do something, listen, reorganize, fill in gaps or something. So we could actually make that input a little bit more interactive and a little bit more active. But we could still use our comprehension, our vocabulary, and our extension production. All we've done is just sort of change the input side of it. But we could also do different kinds of applications in our three applications area of that content input. We could go with a skill focus, which means highlighting something within that dialogue and actually excuse me, actually showing how there's some sort of skills, is a skill of some sort at work. For example, it could be how to request something. It could be how to show that you're interested in something someone's saying. It could be any sort of major skill, and we could actually focus on that and emphasize it in this section. We could then pull out sentences and have them adapt those sentences. We could have them create patterns with sentences that we pull out of the dialogue, and then we show them how they could adapt that and make new sentences from those patterns. And then we could have a pronunciation focus. Words, we could show how certain sounds are used in certain words from that dialogue. Maybe also syllable stress and sentence stress, depending on what we want to focus on. But that way, you can see that's quite different from the material that we've got there. It's the same basic design principle, but we're doing different things with that input. Other things we could do is we could have a section that works a little bit more with pragmatics, how and why language is used the way it is. We could have some sort of more specific grammar focus, a bit more of a focus on the forms and the form. So we could have a grammar emphasis that comes out of that input. And we might be more specific with our pronunciation. We might focus on intonation, for example, how intonation works. We could mark that out and have a practice activity there, or rhythm, as well as sentence stress, how English rhythm works. We could highlight some aspects of that based on the dialogue. So there's 3 other things we could use with our listening speaking dialogue. But we could also put in here, instead of a dialogue, we might put a reading text in instead. So instead of some sort of dialogue, we might like to make it more of a reading based activity. We might put in some sort of text here, using various kinds of text types. We could just have a content-based passage. We could have an article. We could have a review, something more like you'd find in a magazine. We could put all sorts of reading texts in here, and then we could have a comprehension section like we had in the cappuccino chat. We could have a vocabulary section that draws on that reading text again, as per the cappuccino chat, but now we're not really working on spoken language. We're working more just with general vocabulary that comes out of that text. And then instead of extending it like in the cappuccino one, we invited them to extend this conversation in a variety of ways. But with the reading text, we might extend it in a writing sense, that we're going to add more information to the article, or we're going to write a critique of it. We're going to change it in some way. So that's how we could use our 1-3 approach with a reading text. Also sticking with the reading text, we might again go with a skill focus. How to find the main ideas in this text, how to find the purpose, how to find inferences. How inferences work in reading texts based on that input text. We could have a pronunciation section. We could have a bit of an emphasis on reading aloud and how all these words in the reading text are actually enunciated. And again, we could have a grammar activity. We could take a few patterns or grammatical aspects out of that reading text and have a little activity here. Now the point, I've emphasized it before, but the whole point of the 1-3 design principle is that we're going to have variety, that we're not just going to be doing one thing all the time. By having 3 sections, we ensure that we've got a bit of variety and that we don't overdo it with any of these sections. For example, if this whole section here was pronunciation, it might get a bit old with the learners, and we might not be getting as much out of the text as we'd like to. So that's why I recommend a 1-3 design principle, not for all your material, but as one of the approaches that you use when you're designing your material. Another thing we might do, another idea from a reading text, is we might have a visualization activity here where they actually draw things based on what they see happening when they read the text. We might have spelling patterns. We might pull out some words and show how they can be extended and showcase spelling rules. We might do something a bit different. We might use our reading text as a model for writing and then emphasize some sort of writing skill, like how paragraphs are used, how an introduction is composed. So we could actually use that reading text as a model for a writing skill. Now again, what we could also do is adjust this reading text like I showed for the dialogue. Instead of just providing all that text straight up, we could put only part of the text up and integrate it with some sort of listening. We could have a gap fill exercise where they actually have to brainstorm what words might go into certain gaps. We might even scramble the information in that text and have the learners sort it first, put it in order, before we apply our 3 extension activities. So even with the input, as with the reading, the listening and speaking dialogue, there are things we can do immediately with the input that gets the learners more active, challenges them in some other way. Now we might also just avoid any sort of content there in terms of printed words, and we might just use a picture or pictures. And this is another way we can use this basic design principle, and then we can put in elicitation prompts to get them to talk about these pictures. We could show them how they could use some language to describe what they see, and we could focus on this idea of how to guess or predict and how to express those guesses and predictions based on pictures. And that's just the start. I haven't even shown you, that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you could do with the 1-3 design principle. It doesn't always need to be about input on this side, but if you're going to experiment with your materials, it's good to get some kind of rhythm. And I think learners appreciate a bit of rhythm as well. I think they appreciate the idea of that there's going to be a bit of this over here, and then we're going to do certain things over there. And as long as you mix these up a little bit, and make sure there's a bit of variety with each new thing you bring into the learners. Some learners like to have a nice rhythm, but I think if these activities are always the same and done in the same way, it's going to get a bit stale. It's a good idea to mix it up and try different things. And as I said, what this is showcasing is that interface between how you design material and how you use your teaching methodology, how you draw on skills, how you highlight things, how you challenge them and get them thinking about the language and using the language. And it's good to have a nice stable template that allows you to experiment with your methods, experiment with the way you produce, present input, and how you then work with the input. So I thought I would just explain that to you. I've done a lot of work with this sort of template, working with this, but I want you to see that there are so many options available in terms of how you actually use those spaces. The great thing is, if you've got a template ready and set up, it doesn't take as much fidgeting around, because this stuff's already set up. It's just how you work in these sections. It's good if you don't have to go and build this every time, but you can focus on how you're going to do different things within the material in terms of your methodology, and that saves you time. If you've got a nice effective template set up, then you can think more about your methodology. You're not having to redesign everything from the ground up every time, but you've still got something that looks really presentable. It's something you can present up on a screen, or you can print it out as a handout material, and it makes your time more efficient and gets you thinking a little bit more about your methodology. So that was the 1-3 design principle, and some of the different ideas you might like to think about with it. Thanks for paying attention. I hope it's given you a couple of ideas. We might explore some of those applications in future tutorials, but we'll see how we go with that. I think the next tutorial I might look at a bit of a different design principle for you. I hope you'll tune in for that one. That'll be the next one, number 7. This is Jason from English Raven, and thanks for joining me for a bit of materials design.